Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the atmospheric readings on his handheld scanner. The air on Kepler 442b was breathable, but the humidity made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. His cargo hauler had broken down 3 hours ago, leaving him stranded on this backwater planet while waiting for a rescue beacon response. The planet wasn't supposed to have any intelligent life. That's what the survey reports had said when the Terran Colonial Authority marked it for future mining operations. Just some basic plant life and a few small creatures that looked like crosses between rabbits and lizards. Nothing dangerous, nothing valuable, nothing interesting. Marcus had been making routine supply runs between the outer colonies for 5 years now. It was honest work, even if it was lonely. Most planets he visited were either empty or had small human outposts. He rarely encountered other species, and when he did, they were usually traders or diplomats in controlled space stations. That's why he was so surprised when he heard the crying. It started as a soft whimpering sound carried on the humid breeze. Marcus looked up from his repair work, listening carefully. The sound was definitely organic, not mechanical, and it sounded distressed. Following the noise, Marcus walked through the thick vegetation surrounding his crashed hauler. The plants here grew in impossible patterns, twisting and spiraling toward the orange sun that hung low in the sky. Some of the trees had what looked like metallic bark that reflected light in strange ways. The crying grew louder as he pushed through a cluster of blue ferns. In a small clearing ahead, Marcus saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A child sat huddled against the base of one of the metallic trees. But this wasn't a human child. The being was small, maybe 3 feet tall, with pale green skin that seemed to shimmer slightly in the filtered sunlight. Her face was elongated, with large, dark eyes that took up nearly a third of her head. She had what looked like small ridges along her skull, where a human might have hair. Her clothing was made from some kind of silver material that looked far more advanced than anything Marcus carried in his cargo hold. She was definitely alien, and she was clearly in distress. Marcus approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. He'd had basic xenobiology training as part of his hauler license, and the first rule was always to avoid sudden movements around unknown species. "Hey there," he said softly, speaking in standard Galactic even though he doubted she would understand. "Are you okay?" The alien child looked up at him with those enormous dark eyes. Up close, Marcus could see that they weren't completely black like he'd first thought. There were flecks of silver in them, like stars in a night sky. She said something in a language that sounded like musical chimes mixed with whispered wind. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was universal. She was scared, hungry, and alone. He crouched down to her level, staying several feet away to avoid frightening her further. From his utility belt, he pulled out his emergency ration pack. It wasn't much, just some protein bars and water tablets, but it was food. The child's eyes focused on the ration pack immediately. Marcus could see her small chest rising and falling rapidly, and he realized she might be close to collapse from hunger. "It's okay," he said, opening one of the protein bars. "This is food. Human food, but it might help." He broke off a small piece and set it on the ground between them, then backed away to give her space. The child watched him carefully for a long moment before crawling forward and sniffing at the protein bar piece. Her reaction was immediate. She grabbed the piece and ate it quickly, then looked at Marcus with what he interpreted as hope in her large eyes. "More?" Marcus asked, offering the rest of the bar. This time she came closer to take it from his hand. Her small fingers were surprisingly warm. And Marcus noticed that they had an extra joint compared to human fingers. She ate the entire bar in small, careful bites, never taking her eyes off him. Marcus opened his water bottle and offered it to her. She sniffed it first, then took a small sip. Her face scrunched up in what might have been surprise, but she drank more. "Water probably tastes different to you," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. "But it should be safe. All carbon-based life needs H2O. As the alien child finished drinking, Marcus got a better look at her condition. Her silver clothing was torn in several places, and there were what looked like scrapes on her arms and legs. She'd been through some kind of ordeal. "Where are your parents?" Marcus asked, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey concern rather than threat. The child's response was a series of chiming sounds that grew more distressed. She pointed toward the sky, then made a gesture that Marcus interpreted as something falling or crashing. His blood ran cold. "Ship crash?" The child nodded vigorously, surprising Marcus. She understood at least some standard Galactic, even if she couldn't speak it. Marcus looked around the clearing, trying to decide what to do. His own rescue wouldn't arrive for several more hours, and this child was clearly in no condition to be left alone. Whatever had happened to her ship, she was now stranded just like he was. "Okay," he said, standing up slowly. "You can't stay here by yourself. Come with me." He gestured toward the direction of his hauler, and after a moment's hesitation, the child stood up. She was even smaller than he'd thought, and she moved with a slight limp that suggested an injury. The walk back to Marcus's crashed hauler took twice as long as his trip out, since he had to move slowly to accommodate his new companion. She stayed close to him, but not too close, maintaining a careful distance that suggested either cultural training or learned wariness. When they reached his ship, Marcus activated the emergency shelter protocol. His hauler wasn't designed for passengers, but it had basic life support and some minimal living space for exactly this kind of situation. The alien child's eyes went wide when she saw the human technology. She approached the hauler cautiously, running her small hands along its hull. She said something in her musical language that sounded impressed. "It's not much," Marcus said, opening the cargo bay door. "But it's safe, and it has climate control." Inside the hauler, Marcus set up his emergency cot in the small living area and offered it to the child. She climbed onto it carefully, her large eyes taking in all the human equipment around her. Marcus opened his food storage and took inventory. He had enough rations for 3 days, maybe 4 if he stretched them. If his rescue was delayed, sharing with the child might become a problem. But looking at her small, tired form, he couldn't bring himself to worry about that right now. He opened another protein bar and handed it to her. This time she took it without hesitation, eating it more slowly than the first one. "I'm Marcus," he said, pointing to himself. "Marcus." The child tilted her head, considering. Then she pointed to herself and made a sound like wind chimes mixed with a soft whistle. It was beautiful but impossible for human vocal cords to reproduce. "I can't say that," Marcus admitted. "Can I call you Chime? Because your voice sounds like chimes?" She seemed to understand, nodding and repeating chime in a close approximation of his pronunciation. As the orange sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Marcus activated the hauler's external lights and defensive systems. He'd never needed to worry about predators before, but now he was responsible for more than just himself. Chime had curled up on the cot, but Marcus could see that she wasn't sleeping. Her large eyes reflected the interior lights as she watched him work at his repair console. "I'm trying to fix the communication array," Marcus explained, even though he doubted she understood technical terms. "So we can call for help." What he didn't mention was that his attempts to repair the array had been unsuccessful. The crash had damaged more than just the engine. His emergency beacon was working, broadcasting his location to any ships in the system, but his long-range communications were completely down. They were truly stranded, at least until morning when his scheduled check-in would be noticed as missing. Marcus grabbed his own rations and water, sitting down across from Chime to eat his dinner. She watched him with curiosity, occasionally mimicking his movements when he drank water or chewed. "You're pretty smart," Marcus observed. "Learning human gestures already." Chime made a soft chiming sound that might have been agreement. As full darkness settled over the planet, strange sounds began to emerge from the jungle around them. Marcus had heard some of these during his earlier survey of the crash site, but they seemed louder and more numerous now. Chime's head snapped up at the first howl, her large eyes going wide with what was clearly fear. She said something urgent in her own language, pointing toward the door. "It's okay," Marcus said, checking his defensive system's readings. "The shields are up. Nothing can get in." But Chime was clearly agitated. She stood up on the cot and continued making distressed chiming sounds, pointing repeatedly toward the ceiling of the hauler. Marcus frowned, trying to understand what she was trying to communicate. Then another howl echoed through the night, closer this time, and he realized what had her so worried. "You've heard those sounds before," he said. "You know what's out there." Chime nodded frantically, then made a gesture with her hands that looked like something large swooping down from above. "Flying predators," Marcus muttered, checking his external cameras. The night vision showed movement in the trees, but nothing clear enough to identify. He began powering up more of the hauler's defensive systems, including the external deterrent fields. Whatever was out there had Chime terrified, and she'd already survived one crash on this planet. If she was afraid, he should take that seriously. The howling grew closer, and Marcus could now see shapes moving between the trees on his external monitors. They were large, at least the size of horses, and they seemed to be moving in coordinated groups. "Pack hunters," Marcus said, more to himself than to Chime. "Smart ones." Chime had fallen silent, but she was still pointing upward. Marcus realized she wasn't pointing at the ceiling of the hauler. She was pointing at the sky. "Something's coming from above?" he asked. Before Chime could respond, Marcus's proximity alarms began to sound. Something large was approaching from the upper atmosphere, moving fast and heading directly for their location. Marcus's blood ran cold as he looked at the readings. Whatever was coming was massive, easily 10 times the size of his hauler. And it was definitely artificial. A ship. Chime made a sound that was part relief and part terror. She said something in her musical language that sounded like it might be a name. "Someone you know?" Marcus asked, though he was already dreading the answer. The approaching ship was slowing down, clearly intending to land. Marcus watched his sensors as the massive vessel settled into a clearing about half a mile from their position. For several minutes, nothing happened. The jungle had gone completely quiet, even the pack hunters falling silent in the presence of the larger ship. Then Marcus's external cameras detected movement. A figure was walking through the jungle, heading directly toward his hauler with purpose and speed that suggested complete familiarity with the terrain. As the figure came closer to his lights, Marcus got his first clear look at Chime's rescuer. She was tall, at least 7 feet, with the same pale green skin and elongated features as Chime. But where the child seemed delicate and fragile, this adult alien moved with a predatory grace that made Marcus's survival instincts scream warnings. Her clothing was clearly armor, sleek and form-fitting, but obviously designed for combat. She carried what was unmistakably a weapon, though its design was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. Most unsettling of all were her eyes. Like Chime's, they were large and dark with silver flecks, but they held an intelligence that was cold and calculating. As she approached the hauler, those eyes swept over his defensive systems with the analytical gaze of someone evaluating threats. This wasn't a worried parent looking for a lost child. This was a warrior who had come to retrieve something valuable, and Marcus was an obstacle between her and her goal. Chime had seen her too. The child was making excited chiming sounds, but Marcus noticed she wasn't trying to run outside. She seemed happy, but also afraid. The adult alien stopped just outside the range of Marcus's defensive fields. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, studying the human vessel and the human inside it. Then she spoke, and her voice carried clearly through the hauler's external speakers. "Human," she said in perfect standard Galactic, her accent making the familiar words sound exotic and dangerous. "You have something that belongs to me." Marcus felt his heart rate spike as the alien warrior's words echoed through his hauler's speakers. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried the kind of cold authority that suggested she was used to being obeyed without question. He looked down at Chime, who had gone very quiet. The child was still on his cot, but now she was watching both Marcus and the alien outside with wide, uncertain eyes. "Your daughter was injured and stranded," Marcus called out through his external communication system. "I found her in the jungle and gave her food and shelter. She's safe." The alien mother's head tilted slightly, a gesture Marcus was learning might indicate surprise or curiosity in their species. "You gave her food," she repeated, her accent making the words sound almost musical despite their serious tone. "Human food." "She was hungry," Marcus replied simply. For a long moment, the alien woman said nothing. She stood perfectly still outside his defensive perimeter, and Marcus found her motionless, waiting more unsettling than if she had been pacing or making threats. He used the time to study her more carefully through his external cameras. Her armor wasn't just protective gear, he realized. It was integrated with technology he didn't recognize, with small lights and displays that pulsed along the seams. Her weapon looked like it might be energy-based, but its design suggested principles of physics that human science hadn't discovered yet. Most importantly, she was positioned perfectly to avoid his defensive systems while maintaining clear lines of sight to all his potential escape routes. Even if his hauler had been fully functional, she could probably prevent him from taking off. "I am HFY," the alien finally said. "The child is Lyra Senna, my offspring. She was aboard my vessel when it was attacked by raiders 3 days ago." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Raiders attacked you?" "Pirates seeking salvage from our cargo," HFY confirmed. "We escaped, but our ship was damaged. When I attempted an emergency landing, Lyra Senna's escape pod malfunctioned and ejected prematurely." The pieces started falling into place for Marcus. "You've been searching for her." "For 67 hours, HFY said, and for the first time, Marcus heard something other than cold control in her voice. There was exhaustion there, and worry that she was trying to hide. Chime. Lyra Senna made a soft chiming sound from the cot. She said something in their musical language that sounded like it might be an explanation or apology. HFY's response was immediate and sharp, clearly a reprimand. Lyra Senna's head drooped, and Marcus felt his protective instincts kick in. "Hey," he said firmly, causing both aliens to look toward his speaker. "She's been through enough. She doesn't need to be scolded for surviving." The temperature in the air seemed to drop several degrees. HFY's large eyes fixed on the hauler's main viewport, and Marcus could see the cold intelligence behind them calculating something he probably wouldn't like. "You speak to defend a child that is not yours," she observed, "against a parent who outranks you in every measurable way." Marcus stood up, making sure he was visible through the viewport. "I speak to defend a scared kid who's been through hell. Rank doesn't change that." HFY stepped closer to the edge of his defensive field, close enough that Marcus could see the details of her alien features clearly. Her face was expressionless, but those silver-flecked eyes were studying him with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "You are human," she said, making it sound like an observation about something mildly interesting, but ultimately insignificant. "I am," Marcus confirmed. I have heard of your species, young race, primitive technology, limited understanding of galactic protocol. She paused, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling she was cataloging his weaknesses. You should not have interfered. A child needed help, Marcus said. I helped. That's not interference, it's basic decency. Basic decency, HFY repeated, as if testing how the words sounded in her mouth. An interesting concept from a species that has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Marcus felt his temper starting to rise. The condescending tone was beginning to grate on him, especially since he'd spent the last several hours taking care of her daughter while she'd been nowhere to be found. Maybe we're young, he said, trying to keep his voice level. But at least we know the difference between helping someone and lecturing them about it afterward. HFY went very still. Marcus realized he might have just crossed a line he hadn't known existed. You question my judgment, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. I question why you're standing out there making speeches instead of checking on your daughter's health, Marcus shot back. The alien warrior's hand moved to her weapon, a gesture so smooth and natural that Marcus knew it was probably instinctive. But she didn't draw it. Lyra Senna appears unharmed, HFY observed. She has cuts and scrapes. She's been without proper food for days, and she's clearly traumatized, Marcus listed. Just because she's alive doesn't mean she's unharmed. For the first time since she'd appeared, HFY seemed to hesitate. Her eyes moved to the viewport where Lyra Senna was visible sitting on Marcus's cot, and Marcus saw something flicker across her alien features that might have been concern. You have medical knowledge of my species? She asked. I have common sense about children, Marcus replied. Any species. HFY studied him for another long moment, then made a decision that surprised him. Instead of demanding that he lower his shields or threatening to breach them, she sat down cross-legged just outside his defensive perimeter. The gesture was so unexpected that Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. The deadly alien warrior had just made herself appear smaller and less threatening. Tell me of her condition, HFY said simply. Marcus blinked, then looked back at Lyra Senna. The child was watching their conversation with obvious interest, her large eyes moving between Marcus and her mother. She was severely dehydrated when I found her, Marcus began. Hungry enough to eat human rations even though they probably taste terrible to her. She has what looks like scrapes on her arms and legs, possibly from her crash landing or from moving through the jungle. HFY nodded, encouraging him to continue. She's been scared but cooperative, Marcus went on, learning some human gestures and words. She warned me about the predators in the jungle tonight. The night hunters, HFY confirmed. They are dangerous to small prey. She seemed to know that from experience, Marcus said. Has she encountered them before? HFY's expression darkened. The raiders who attacked us used trained night hunters as part of their assault. Lyra Senna saw them kill 3 of my crew members before we escaped. Marcus felt his stomach clench. No wonder the child had been terrified when they heard the howling. She'd seen those things kill people she knew. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You did not cause their deaths, HFY replied, but her tone had lost some of its cold edge. Marcus made a decision that his training would probably call stupid, but his instincts said was right. He began powering down his defensive fields. What are you doing? HFY asked, standing up quickly as the energy barriers between them dissolved. You came to get your daughter, Marcus said, opening his hauler's main airlock, so come get her. HFY stared at him for a moment, her hand still resting on her weapon. This could be a trap. Could be, Marcus agreed. But it's not. I'm not a soldier or a diplomat or a traitor trying to gain advantage. I'm a cargo hauler who found a lost kid. That's all. The alien warrior approached the airlock slowly, her eyes scanning the interior of the hauler visible beyond the open door. Marcus could see her cataloging his equipment, his weapon systems, his defensive capabilities. "You have military-grade shield generators," she observed. "Shipping valuable cargo through pirate-infested space," Marcus explained. "The company requires certain safety standards, yet you turned them off to allow an armed alien aboard your vessel." Marcus shrugged. "Sometimes you have to take calculated risks." HFY stepped into the airlock, having to duck slightly to fit through the human-sized doorway. Up close, Marcus could see that her armor was even more sophisticated than he'd initially thought. It seemed to shift and adjust as she moved, redistributing its protective properties based on her position and posture. When she entered the main living area of the hauler, Lyricena immediately began making excited chiming sounds. She started to climb down from the cot, but HFY held up a hand that clearly meant, "Stay where you are." The child stopped moving, but continued to chirp happily at her mother. HFY approached the cot slowly, her large eyes examining Lyricena from head to toe. She spoke in their musical language, asking what sounded like questions about the child's health and experiences. Lyricena responded with a rapid series of chimes and whistles, occasionally pointing at Marcus or at the food wrappers from the protein bars he'd shared with her. As the alien conversation continued, Marcus noticed HFY's posture gradually relaxing. The rigid military bearing softened into something more recognizably parental as she listened to her daughter's account. Finally, HFY reached out and gently touched Lyricena's face, examining the scrapes on her arms with careful fingers. The child leaned into the touch, making soft, contented sounds. "She says you shared your food with her even though you did not know when you would be rescued yourself," HFY said without looking at Marcus. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Marcus replied. "She says you made her feel safe when the night hunters came." "I activated the defensive systems. Standard procedure." HFY finally turned to look at him. "She says you called her Chime because her voice sounded beautiful to you." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I couldn't pronounce her real name. I had to call her something." "You chose a name that honored the sound of her voice rather than simply shortening her actual name to something convenient for human pronunciation." "Well, yeah." HFY studied him with those unnerving large eyes, and Marcus had the feeling he was being evaluated according to criteria he didn't understand. "Lyricena also says you did not ask her about our ship, our technology, or our destination," HFY continued. "Human traders and diplomats always ask such questions." "She was scared and hurt," Marcus said. "Didn't seem like the time for an interrogation." "No," HFY agreed quietly. "It did not." The alien warrior stood up, towering over Marcus in the small living space of the hauler. But instead of appearing threatening, she now seemed to be considering something carefully. "My people have had limited contact with humans," she said finally. "Most of those contacts have been disappointing." "How so?" "Your species is young but ambitious, eager to acquire technology and knowledge from older races, often without considering whether such gifts should be earned rather than simply requested." Marcus nodded. "I can see how that would get annoying." "What is more troubling is that humans often see children of other species as leverage for negotiations with adults," HFY continued, "or as sources of information about species' capabilities and weaknesses." The implication hit Marcus like a cold wave. "You thought I was holding Lyricena for ransom, or interrogating her?" "I considered both possibilities," HFY confirmed. "It would have been consistent with previous human behavior patterns." "But you came alone," Marcus observed. "If you really thought I was a threat to your daughter, wouldn't you have brought backup?" HFY's mouth curved in what might have been the alien equivalent of a smile, though it showed teeth that looked far too sharp for Marcus's comfort. "I did not require backup to deal with a single human in a damaged cargo vessel," she said simply. The casual confidence in that statement was probably meant to be reassuring, but Marcus found it more than a little intimidating. "So what changed your mind?" he asked. "Lyra Senna's account of your behavior," HFY replied, "and my observation of your choices during our conversation." "Such as?" "You lowered your defenses to allow me aboard your ship. You defended my daughter against perceived criticism from her own parent. You showed concern for her emotional state, not just her physical condition." HFY paused. "These are not the actions of someone seeking advantage or leverage." Marcus glanced at Lyra Senna, who was watching their conversation with obvious interest despite not understanding most of the words. "They're the actions of someone who gives a damn about a scared kid," he said. "Yes," HFY agreed. "They are." The alien warrior walked to one of the viewports and looked out at the jungle beyond. "My people value strength and capability above most other traits. We respect those who can protect what they claim to care about." "Makes sense. You protected Lyra Senna from predators and from starvation using resources you could not easily replace. You did this without knowing her value to me or to my people, without knowing if such protection would be rewarded or punished." Marcus was starting to feel like this conversation was building towards something, but he couldn't figure out what. "You also chose to trust me despite knowing nothing of my intentions or capabilities," HFY continued. "Despite the fact that I could easily kill you and take Lyra Senna regardless of your preferences." "Could you?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. HFY turned back to look at him, and her expression was definitely a smile this time. "Yes," she said simply, "but I will not need to." Before Marcus could ask what she meant by that, his long-range communications system suddenly crackled to life. The display screen lit up with an incoming transmission from a Terran Colonial Authority rescue vessel. "Hauler 779, this is TCA Rescue Ship Meridian," came a voice through the speakers. "We've received your emergency beacon. Are you in need of assistance?" Marcus looked at HFY, suddenly realizing that his rescue had just become significantly more complicated. The alien warrior was watching him carefully, and Marcus understood that his next words would determine whether this situation ended peacefully or became an interspecies incident. "TCA Meridian, this is Marcus Chen aboard Hauler 779, he responded. "I am safe and my situation is under control. I have made contact with friendly alien civilians who are providing assistance." HFY's eyebrows rose in what was clearly surprise. "Copy that, 779. Do you require medical evacuation or technical assistance?" Marcus looked at Lyra Senna, then at HFY. "Negative, Meridian. The aliens have superior medical and technical capabilities. I'm in good hands." "Understood. We'll mark your beacon as resolved unless you request further assistance." "Thank you, Meridian. 779 out." As the transmission ended, HFY stared at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. "You told them we were providing assistance," she said slowly. "You are," Marcus replied, "by taking care of your daughter instead of me having to worry about her welfare during a rescue operation. You did not tell them about our advanced technology or request an opportunity to establish formal contact with my people." "Wasn't my call to make," Marcus said. "That's between you and the diplomatic corps." HFY was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes studying Marcus's face as if she was seeing him for the first time. "Most humans would have seen this as an opportunity," she said finally. "For what?" "To gain status with your authorities by facilitating first contact, to acquire alien technology through diplomatic leverage, to advance their own position by becoming intermediaries between our species." Marcus shrugged. "I'm a cargo hauler, not a diplomat. My job is moving things from point A to point B safely. Everything else is above my pay grade." "Is that truly how you see this situation?" "I see a mother who found her lost daughter," Marcus said simply. "Everything else is politics." HFY exchanged a look with Lyra Senna, speaking briefly in their musical language. The child responded with what sounded like agreement, nodding vigorously. Lyra Senna wishes to give you something, HFY said, a token of gratitude for your care. The child climbed down from the cot and approached Marcus. From somewhere in her silver clothing, she produced a small object that looked like a crystalline flower. It was beautiful, seeming to glow with its own internal light. I can't accept payment for helping a kid, Marcus said, though he was obviously touched by the gesture. It is not payment, HFY explained. It is acknowledgement. In our culture, such gifts create bonds of mutual obligation and respect. Lyra Senna held the crystal flower up toward Marcus, saying something in her chiming language. She says that if you ever have need, you should think of her voice and help will come, HFY translated. Marcus looked between the mother and daughter, trying to understand the implications of what was being offered. What kind of help? HFY's expression became serious as she considered Marcus's question about what kind of help the crystal flower might bring. She spoke quietly to Lyra Senna in their musical language, and the child nodded solemnly before responding. She wants you to understand the significance of her gift, HFY said finally. But first, there are things you should know about our people and our place in this galaxy. Marcus accepted the crystal flower from Lyra Senna, noting that it was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently with internal light. I'm listening. HFY walked to the viewport again, looking out at her ship in the distance. My people are called the Veltar. We are what your species would call an ancient race. We have been traveling between stars for over 50,000 of your years. That's a long time, Marcus said, trying to wrap his head around the time frame. In that time, we have encountered hundreds of species. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We have watched young races take their first steps into space, and we have seen others destroy themselves before they could spread beyond their home worlds. Marcus felt a chill at the implications. And where do humans fit in that pattern? That is what we have been trying to determine, HFY replied. Your species appeared in galactic space recently and rapidly. In less than 2 centuries, you have spread to dozens of worlds and established trade relationships with multiple species. Sounds like we're doing okay? Perhaps, but expansion speed is not the measure we use to judge a species' long-term survival potential. HFY turned back to face him, and Marcus could see something like sadness in her large eyes. We measure character, she continued. How a species treats those who cannot defend themselves, how they respond to the suffering of others, whether they choose cooperation or exploitation when given the opportunity for both. Marcus was beginning to understand why this conversation felt so important. And humans haven't scored well on those measurements? The evidence has been mixed, HFY admitted. Most of our encounters with your people have involved attempts to extract technological or territorial advantages from interactions with us. Your diplomats speak of mutual benefit, but their actions suggest they see us primarily as resources to be acquired. That's not how all humans think, Marcus protested. We hoped that was true, HFY said. But hope is not the same as evidence. Lyra Senna chimed something from the cot, pointing at Marcus, and then at the empty protein bar wrappers. She reminds me that you provided evidence, HFY translated, when you chose to care for her without seeking advantage. Marcus looked down at the crystal flower in his hands, starting to realize that this conversation was about much more than a rescued child. What aren't you telling me about who you are? He asked directly. HFY exchanged another look with her daughter, and Marcus caught something that looked like pride in the child's expression. I am HFY of the 7th Circle, she said formally. Fleet Commander of the Veltar Expeditionary Forces and Speaker for the Council of Ancients in matters regarding newly spacefaring species. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. You're their first contact specialist. Among other duties, yes. And Lyra Senna? Is my daughter and heir to my position within the council hierarchy. Marcus sat down heavily in his pilot's chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. So, when I found her in the jungle, you encountered the daughter of one of the most powerful individuals in Veltar society, HFY confirmed. A child whose opinions and experiences will directly influence how my people interact with humanity for generations to come. The crystal flower in Marcus's hands seemed to pulse brighter, as if responding to his elevated stress levels. But you didn't tell me any of this, Marcus said. Would it have changed your actions? Marcus considered that. Would he have behaved differently if he'd known Lyra Senna was alien royalty? Would he have tried to leverage the situation for some kind of diplomatic advantage? No, he said finally. She was still a scared kid who needed help. Exactly, HFY said, and her tone held something like satisfaction. Your behavior was based on the inherent value you placed on a child's welfare, not on the potential benefits of helping her. Is that unusual? Extremely, HFY replied. In our experience, most species treat individuals differently based on their perceived importance or value. The powerful receive care and consideration, while the weak are ignored or exploited. Marcus thought about that. But you tested me. You could have identified yourself from the beginning, but you didn't. I needed to observe your natural behavior patterns, HFY confirmed. If I had revealed my status immediately, any kindness you showed would have been suspect. And if I had failed your test? HFY's hand moved unconsciously toward her weapon. Then Lyra Senna would have learned an important lesson about the untrustworthiness of humans, and I would have acted accordingly to protect her. The casual way she said it made Marcus's skin crawl. He realized that if he'd made different choices, this situation could have ended very differently for both him and for humanity's future relationships with alien species. So what happens now? He asked. HFY smiled, and this time it looked genuinely warm. Now you receive the consequences of your choices. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, his communication system activated again. But this time, it wasn't the human rescue ship. The voice that emerged from his speakers was clearly alien, though it spoke in perfect standard Galactic. Fleet Commander HFY, this is Battle Group 7 requesting permission to commence landing operations. Marcus's jaw dropped. Battle Group. HFY activated Marcus's external cameras and pointed toward the sky. Look up. In the upper atmosphere, descending slowly through the orange-tinted clouds, Marcus could see shapes that made his salvaged hauler look like a child's toy. Massive vessels, at least a dozen of them, moving in perfect formation toward the planet's surface. I told you I came alone, HFY said with amusement. I did not say I was unsupported. Those ships have been in orbit around this system since I began searching for Lyra Senna 3 days ago, HFY explained, waiting to see how this situation would resolve. Marcus stared at the descending fleet, trying to process the implications. They were ready to attack if things went wrong. They were ready to ensure my daughter's safety and to respond appropriately to whatever we discovered about human nature. HFY corrected. Lyra Senna chimed something that sounded excited, pointing at the sky where the ships were becoming more visible. She recognizes her grandfather's flagship, HFY translated. The Council of Ancients has come to witness the results of our experiment. Experiment? Finding an isolated human and observing their behavior when presented with an opportunity to help someone weaker than themselves, HFY explained. We have conducted similar tests with representatives of several species over the centuries. Marcus felt a mix of indignation and curiosity. And how did we score compared to the others? You wish the truth? Yes. Most species would have ignored Lyra Senna entirely, seeing her as irrelevant to their survival situation. Some would have captured her for use as a bargaining chip with her people. A few would have harmed her out of xenophobic fear. Marcus felt sick. How few species actually helped? Including humans? Kethvi paused. 3. Out of how many tested? 47. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. In a galaxy full of intelligent species, only 3 had demonstrated the basic compassion to help a lost child without expectation of reward. What happened to the species that helped? He asked. They received the friendship and protection of the Veltar, Kethvi replied. They became our allies and partners in maintaining peace among the younger races. And the others? They discovered that the galaxy is a much larger and more dangerous place than they initially believed. The implication was clear. Species that failed the Veltar test found themselves facing a universe where one of the most powerful civilizations considered them untrustworthy. So this crystal flower, Marcus began, is a communication device, Kethvi confirmed, linked directly to the Veltar Emergency Response Network. If you ever face a threat beyond your ability to handle, it will summon aid. What kind of aid? Kethvi gestured toward the descending ships. The kind that travels in battle groups. Marcus looked down at the innocent-seeming crystal flower with new respect. This is basically a hotline to the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Yes, Kethvi said simply. And you're giving it to a cargo hauler from a species that most people think is too young and primitive to matter. I am giving it to a human who chose compassion over self-interest when he believed no one was watching, Kethvi corrected. Who protected my daughter not because of what she could give him, but because it was the right thing to do. Lyra Senna approached Marcus again, saying something in her musical language while pointing at the crystal flower. She wants you to know that the gift also works both ways, Kethvi translated. If the Veltar ever have need of assistance in human space, we may call upon you specifically. What could I possibly do to help a civilization that's been spacefaring for 50,000 years? You could do exactly what you did for Lyra Senna, Kethvi replied. Show us that there are still species in this galaxy capable of choosing right over easy. The first of the Veltar ships had landed, and Marcus could see figures emerging from it. They were tall like Kethvi, but their clothing suggested even higher rank and status. The council is coming, Marcus observed. They wish to meet you, Kethvi confirmed, and to formally welcome humanity into the alliance of protected species. Based on what I did? Based on what you chose not to do, she corrected. When given the opportunity to exploit Lyra Senna's vulnerability for personal gain, you chose instead to simply care for her well-being. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Most people would have done the same thing. Would they? Kethvi asked. Even when they were stranded themselves, with limited resources and uncertain rescue prospects. Marcus considered that. How many people would really share their emergency rations with a strange alien child? How many would risk lowering their defenses to let an armed alien warrior aboard their ship? I hope they would, he said finally. Hope, Kethvi repeated. Another admirable human trait. The ability to believe in the goodness of others even when evidence is limited. The approaching Veltar dignitaries were almost at the hauler now. Marcus could see that their clothing incorporated technology that made Kethvi's armor look primitive by comparison. What should I say to them? Marcus asked, suddenly nervous about representing his entire species. Tell them exactly what you told me, Kethvi replied, that a child needed help, so you helped. Nothing more complicated than that. And what happens to humanity after this? You become our allies and trading partners. Your people gain access to Veltar technology and protection. Your colonies receive support against pirates and hostile species. Marcus stared at her. All because I shared some protein bars with a lost kid? All because you demonstrated that humans are capable of goodness without expectation of reward, HFY corrected. That is rarer and more valuable than any technology. The Veltar delegation had reached the hauler. Through the viewport, Marcus could see several individuals who radiated authority and power. One of them, older than the others, approached the airlock. My father, HFY said quietly. High Council Leader Thren Kai. No pressure, Marcus muttered. Lyricena giggled at his obvious nervousness, making chiming sounds that were clearly amused. She said something to her mother in their musical language. She says you should not be worried, HFY translated. You have already passed the hardest test. Everything else is just ceremony. The airlock cycled, and the elder Veltar stepped inside. He was even taller than HFY, with the same large eyes and elongated features, but his presence filled the small space in a way that made Marcus understand immediately why he led a galactic civilization. You are Marcus Chen, Thren Kai said in standard galactic, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, standing straighter despite himself. Thren Kai looked around the modest interior of the hauler, his gaze taking in the emergency cot where Lyricena sat, the empty food containers, and the basic human technology. You cared for my granddaughter with these simple resources, he observed. I did my best, sir. Your best included sharing supplies you could not easily replace, protecting her from predators with equipment inferior to our technology, and treating her with kindness despite not knowing her value to our people. Marcus nodded, unsure what response was expected. Do you understand the significance of these actions? Your daughter explained about the test, Marcus said carefully. I understand that how I treated Lyricena reflects on how humans might be judged by your people. Thren Kai's large eyes studied Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like every thought in his head was being catalogued and evaluated. The test was not of your species, the elder Veltar said finally. It was of you, specifically. Marcus blinked. I don't understand. We have been observing human behavior for months, Thren Kai explained. We have seen your diplomats, your traders, your military leaders. All of them approach interactions with other species as opportunities for advancement. But I'm not any of those things, Marcus protested. I'm just a cargo hauler. Exactly, Thren Kai said, and Marcus caught something that might have been satisfaction in the alien leader's voice. You are what humans call an ordinary person, not trained in diplomacy or motivated by political advancement, simply an individual faced with a moral choice. The full implication hit Marcus like a cold wave. You wanted to see how a regular human would behave. We wanted to see whether the compassion occasionally demonstrated by your leaders extends to your general population, Thren Kai confirmed. Whether kindness is a trained behavior for political purposes or a genuine characteristic of your species. Lyricena chimed something from the cot, and both HFY and Thren Kai smiled at her words. She says that humans have good hearts, HFY translated, and that Marcus proved it. Thren Kai approached Marcus, towering over the human even more than his daughter did. But instead of appearing threatening, his presence now felt protective. Marcus Chen of Earth, he said formally, by your actions you have demonstrated that humanity possesses the moral characteristics necessary for membership in the Galactic Council of Peaceful Species. What? Your species will be invited to join the council as full members, Thren Kai continued, with all the rights, protections, and responsibilities that such membership entails. Marcus sat down heavily in his pilot's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Because I helped a lost kid. because you proved that humans can choose compassion over self-interest, even when no one is watching and no reward is expected, Threnkai corrected. This is the foundation upon which peaceful civilizations are built. The elder Veltar reached into his robes and produced another crystal flower, this one larger and more complex than the one Lyra Senna had given Marcus. This is for your government leaders, he explained, a direct communication link to the Galactic Council. They will have questions, and we will have answers. Marcus accepted the second crystal flower, noting that it felt heavier and warmer than the first. What do I tell them about how this happened? Tell them the truth, Threnkai replied, that the future of human civilization was determined by a cargo hauler who chose to feed a hungry child. They're not going to believe that. Then they will learn an important lesson about the kind of actions that truly matter in a galaxy full of intelligent species, Kethvi observed. Lyra Senna climbed down from the cot and approached Marcus one more time. She said something in her chiming language while looking directly into his eyes. She says thank you, Kethvi translated, and she hopes that when she is older, she can visit Earth to see more humans like you. Tell her she's welcome any time, Marcus said, surprised by how much he meant it. As the Veltar family prepared to leave, Marcus realized that his simple life as a cargo hauler was about to become much more complicated. The communication crystals in his possession would make him one of the most important humans in the galaxy, whether he wanted that responsibility or not. One last question, he called out as Threnkai reached the airlock. The elder Veltar turned back to face him. What would have happened if I'd failed your test? Threnkai's expression became very serious. Humanity would have remained under observation for another century or two. If the pattern of behavior we observed in you had been repeated by others of your species, you would eventually have been judged unfit for peaceful coexistence. And then? Then the galaxy would have been a more dangerous place for humans, Threnkai replied simply. As the Veltar delegation returned to their ships, Marcus sat alone in his hauler holding two crystal flowers that represented his species' future among the stars. Outside, the massive alien vessels were beginning their ascent back to space, taking with them a lost child who was now safe with her family. His communication system crackled to life once more, this time with a transmission from the human rescue ship. Hauler 779, this is TCA Meridian. We're reading massive energy signatures in your vicinity. Are you under attack? Marcus looked up at the departing Veltar fleet, then down at the crystal flowers in his hands. Negative, Meridian, he replied. Just making some new friends. As he powered up his hauler's systems and prepared for the rescue ship's arrival, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken in the past day. He'd started as a nobody cargo hauler stranded on a backwater planet. Now he was apparently humanity's ambassador to the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, all because he'd chosen to share his lunch with a scared kid. Sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched the stars, the most important decisions were also the simplest ones.